Well, I suspect that this happens to all of us, that we read all these spiritual books, we get all inspired and uplifted, we try to apply these spiritual principles in our lives, and then everything just falls apart. Life gets busy and something comes at us and all those spiritual ideas go straight out the window, and we're just like, it just, we just can't seem to remember those wonderful spiritual truths when life comes at us. So we need reminders. We need constant reminders of who we really are. And we need a way of looking at life that sort of takes the edge off, and lets us see things from a higher perspective. And we might collect a bunch of random ideas, but those are easy to just sort of fall away. So we need like frameworks or these models of perception that they help us to interpret what comes at us. So we've got something a little bit more sticky. And then it's with these frameworks or these models of perception that they become the default way in which we interpret the world and the way that we interpret what happens. And so an example of this is like the modern version of when life gives you lemons, make lemonades. You've probably heard this one recently. It says, things aren't happening to me, they're happening for me. And that's a very powerful statement because it takes us out of victimhood. It takes us out of a sense of somebody did something to me or life threw some curveball at me, and we say, okay, so what am I going to do here? How am I going to choose to perceive this? And we start looking for opportunities. We look for a lesson. We look for growth. So we look for some opportunity in that. And actually today when we read that value statement, that was all about seeing what happens in this world differently. So that's, I would call that a relative truth because it helps us cope. It helps us deal with, life as it comes at us. Another example of a framework that completely turned Myrtle Fillmore's life upside down, she was a co-founder of Unity, was she went to a spiritual talk and she heard the statement, I am a child of God and therefore I cannot inherit sickness. And all her life, from being a little child, she had tuberculosis, and it was believed that she had inherited this from her father's side of the family. She'd been sickly her whole life, and things weren't looking too good for her. And she heard this idea that I am a child of God, and therefore I do not inherit sickness. It flipped her understanding of this world, and from that point forward, she clung to that truth. That's an absolute truth. And then within a few years, she was completely free of tuberculosis, and she went on to live, decades longer. And so what I'd like to share today is another one of these relative truths. It helps us sort of navigate this world in a more peaceful manner and be at peace with what's happening. And if it works for you, great. If it doesn't, just put it on a shelf and, one of those things like, I'll think about that later. But what I'd like us to consider today is this distinction between dream life and waking life. Because for the most part, we feel like it's so clear that when we go to sleep at night and we have those nighttime dreams, that's a dream, that's illusion, and this right here is real. This is reality. But what if this so-called waking state itself is also a dream? Just another layer in the dream. And, what if time and space and even these bodies are a lot more malleable than we think? And if we wake up from this dream, well, then what do we wake up to? Obviously we're going to wake up to something more than this. And we wouldn't be here today if we didn't already believe that there was more to life than just this puny little existence. So, if you let's go back to the analogy in the meditation. I got that from a Gary Renard workshop. It was right here in the sanctuary years ago. But in that meditation, it was so clear to us as adults, comforting that little child, that what she was seeing was, illusory. It was just a dream. And so we could tell her with confidence that she was still safe at home, that nothing could hurt her. It was just a dream, and that she could wake up anytime she chose to. But you see, what if that same line of reasoning applies to us right here, right now? And the Holy Spirit's telling us, you're still at home. You've never left in the first place. And nothing can harm you, no matter how scary it seems. You're safe. I'm with you. And you can wake up anytime you choose. So if we step back a little bit and we take on this higher perspective, sometimes it just allows us to perceive life differently, to maybe be a little more open and receptive to miracles in our lives, or, open to things that don't depend on human logic or physical laws or the limits of time and space. Sort of like maybe time gets out of order. Sort of like when you're thinking of a friend you haven't thought about for years, and 5 seconds later the phone rings and it's your friend you haven't talked to for years. I just love it when time just sort of, is malleable. Or maybe it's just easier for us to forgive what we thought was unforgivable because we take on this higher perspective. Or we see possibilities where things seemed impossible, or maybe we experience a physical healing that, according to the official diagnosis, would be impossible. But yet we know that happens all the time, that these bodies are much more flexible and malleable than we think. So, of course, I think this is great. I'd love to play with these ideas, but some people might say, well, you know what, this approach will cause you to become, dispassionate or disconnected from this world and sort of aloof, and then you won't really participate fully in life. But I've got a really great story that speaks to that. And this is from a book written by Jan Fraser called When Fear Falls Away, one of the best books I've ever read. Our daughter Amy took the book a few days ago, so she sent me some pictures. So I've got just a few passages I want to share. And so this Jan Fraser, I can't tell the whole story, but suffice it to say, after years and years and years and years of struggle and paralyzing fear, she, in a heartfelt prayer, in a true, sincere, heartfelt prayer, all her fear fell away. And I mean all her fear. She completely saw the world differently. She was in this state of bliss. It actually took her weeks or even months to adjust to this. But as she adjusted to this new state of being, she still had the same house, the same husband, the same dog and kids. Nothing changed on the outer. But her perception of everything was completely changed. And so she's talking here about the difference between this physical world and this spiritual world that she had, become awake to. And she says, it is not as though ordinary life doesn't go on. It's just that it ceases to feel ordinary. It's just that whatever you do with that awareness underlying it is radically improved. Improved in clarity, in power, improved in its capacity to generate joy and to accept difficult situations. It isn't as though you have to choose between these modes. Not at all. Well, actually, most everyone does choose. They opt, quite unconsciously, not to choose the transcendent mode. I love that term, the transcendent mode. But having turned toward it, having longed for it, having opened your mouth even briefly to its bottomless cup, you begin to be established in it. And you don't lose the other, this world. You don't lose the other along the way, not at all. You just improve it dramatically. So she shares a story of her daughter, which I surmise her daughter was in her teens, and it was about her father from a previous marriage. And so she tells this story. She says, I knew it when my daughter was in a trauma, a shuddering moment in the life of the heart. And I just sat outside her heart and watched, untraumatized myself. Huh? How could that be? How did that happen? And without my entering the uproar, I was able to bring enormous resources to bear, myself unwounded. And without my taking hold of her situation and stepping in, she became mighty and let herself be vulnerable in the most blessed of ways. Let her heart open to wanting love with her father, from whom she has felt so disconnected. It was a miracle. And the deeper miracle is that I never had to suffer for it. Previously, she would have jumped in and, rescued her daughter, or, maybe railed against her ex-husband, for what he did, but instead she was with her daughter in this completely different space. And her daughter was then able to work through this and really communicate with her father from a different viewpoint. And she asks on the next page, she's like, what? She says, it's been this way all along? You mean I could have lived my whole life this way and spared myself all that pointless anguish? And she just really woke up to that. So I think the irony of this is that this higher level of awareness, instead of making us ambivalent to life or unattached, it really allows us to live life more fully and intentionally and consciously. There's a beautiful quote I love from A Course in Miracles. It says, "The journey to God is merely the reawakening of the knowledge of where you are always and what you are forever. It is a journey without distance to a goal that has never changed." I love that idea, journey without distance, meaning that we never left in the first place. We're simply remembering, reawakening. And we don't have to acquire or gain knowledge. We simply reawaken to the knowledge of where we are always and what we've always been. And the author and poet T.S. Eliot said something that's eerily similar. He said this, he said, "And the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." Isn't that cool? To arrive where we started, because we never left in the first place, but it feels like we know the place for the first time. It's like strangely familiar. All right, so there's this awesome video I want to share with you from a British-American philosopher called Alan Watts. And he was really active back in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, so enjoy this video.
If you awaken from this illusion, and you understand that black implies white, self implies other, life implies death, or shall I say, death implies life, you can feel yourself not as a stranger in the world, not as something here on probation, not as something that has arrived here by fluke, but you can begin to feel your own existence as absolutely fundamental. I'm not trying to sell you on this idea in the sense of converting you to it. I want you to play with it. I want you to think of its possibilities. I'm not trying to prove it. I'm just putting it forward as a possibility of life to think about. So then, let's suppose that you were able every night to dream any dream you wanted to dream. And that you could, for example, have the power within one night to dream 75 years of time, or any length of time you wanted to have. And you would naturally, as you began on this adventure of dreams, you would fulfill all your wishes. You would have every kind of pleasure you could conceive. And after several nights of 75 years of total pleasure each, you would say, well, that was pretty great. But now let's have a surprise. Let's have a dream which isn't under control. Well, something is going to happen to me that I don't know what it's going to be. And you would dig that and come out of that and say, wow, that was a close shave, wasn't it? And then you would get more and more adventurous, and you would make further and further out gambles as to what you would dream. And finally, you would dream where you are now. You would dream the dream of living the life that you are actually living today. That would be within the infinite multiplicity of choices you would have, of playing that you weren't God. Because the whole nature of the Godhead, according to this idea, is to play that he's not. So in this idea then, everybody is fundamentally the ultimate reality, not God in a politically kingly sense, but God in the sense of being the self, the deep down basic whatever there is. And you're all that, only you're pretending you're not.
Oh, isn't that awesome? It's like, and his British accent just makes it so true. It's just like, I love how it started out as a game, right? Just an adventure, a lifetime lived, in a nighttime of dreaming. And then, he got more and more adventurous, more outrageous, taking big gambles. But then somehow we forgot. We just completely forgot. We got caught up in it, and we forgot who we are. And so that's the challenge for us, is to remember who we are while living life fully. So obviously that video hinted at the idea of reincarnation. And every night, every dream was an entire lifetime. And for me, that idea really blew my mind open. When I was in my 20s, I read all kinds of books. And the idea of reincarnation loosened up my grip, right? Because then I was like, well, I guess if it doesn't work out this time, I'll have another try. I'll have another try at it. Or it was easier to maybe forgive things or realize that, okay, we're all working through our issues and all working through stuff. Unity doesn't talk a whole lot about reincarnation. Even though Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, the founders, believed in it, and even Charles thought that he knew who he was in his past lives. But what Charles eventually said was, he said that it's an answer, but it's not the answer. So it's a helpful tool, it's a helpful framework to look at things, and it sort of opens us up to a broader perception and maybe looking beyond these puny little lives. And even the Hindus and the Buddhists, who have a strong emphasis on reincarnation, they also have this concept of breaking the cycle of reincarnation or breaking free of the wheel. So we're going to wake up to something else. So if even multiple lifetimes is also itself a dream, well then what is it that we wake up to? So that opens us up, but the key is to figure out, how do we live this life fully without getting so caught up into it we can't see the forest for the trees, yet also step back enough that we can enjoy it fully and consciously. That's the dance that we're all dancing and trying to work out for ourselves. So while some of these ideas are liberating and just exciting and just fun to think about, sometimes it might also feel a little bit threatening or maybe a little bit scary. Like, whoa, I don't want to get sucked up into the infinity or sucked into the allness, or, it can be a little bit scary because we don't want to wake up so suddenly. And I had that experience once when I was meditating about 10 or 15 years ago, and I put on the brakes. I was like, whoa, I got a wife and kids and a life to live, and I was just evaporating into the bliss, and so I put the brakes on. And we can all do that. Because the Holy Spirit is gentle and kind. And we can just say, Spirit, just give it to me, as fast as I can take it. Help me understand these ideas. I don't want to, get scared too much, but, just a simple prayer to Spirit to sort of spoon feed us in a rate at which we can accept it, in a way that it's exciting and it's liberating and it's fun, as opposed to being threatening or scary. Because if there's any kind of conflict or agony or sacrifice, you can be sure that's sort of a game of the ego. That's how things happen in Hollywood. But with the Holy Spirit, it's always gentle and kind. There's another really awesome quote I want to share with you that puts things in perspective. It sort of helps us to stand back. Because when we're in the battle, when we're in the midst of fighting it out with our family members, our colleagues, the people on the road, we just sort of get lost. And there's this little section in A Course in Miracles that's titled Above the Battleground. And it says this: be lifted up, and from a higher place look down upon it. From there will your perspective be quite different. Here in the midst of it, it does seem real. Here you have chosen to be part of it. Here murder is your choice. Yet from above, the choice is miracles instead of murder. And the perspective coming from this choice shows you the battle is not real and easily escaped. Bodies may battle, but the clash of forms is meaningless. and it is over when you realize it never was begun. How can a battle be perceived as nothingness when you engage in it? So each one of us has to choose. Do I really want to fight that battle? Is it really worth proving to, Aunt Jane that she's wrong and I'm right? We engage in these battles, and then later we realize, man, what was I thinking? I could have stood back and seen the greater thing. I could have seen the truth in her. I could have seen the Christ in her. So, in summary, I think all of us, we long for home, right? Home with a capital H. And that's why we're so entranced with stories like The Wizard of Oz. Because Dorothy, at any given time, she could have just sort of tapped her slippers together and returned home. But she had to go through this journey. And every one of us has a beacon inside of us, a beacon with a capital B. It's this quiet longing that calls to us, trying to remind us of home. But it's up to us whether we want to listen or not. And we all need reminders, constant reminders of our eternal spiritual nature. And this framework of looking life as if it's a dream, that's just one way to remind ourselves to look at it from that higher perspective. And because if it's all a dream, well then things aren't as solid as they seem to be. Stuff can change because dreams are fluid and malleable and nothing's permanent or hopeless. You've probably heard of the concept of lucid dreaming, where, in the middle of your nighttime dream, you become aware that you're dreaming, and then you start to direct your dream, or at least be aware that you're dreaming. So I invite all of us to live our lives from that state of awareness, a kind of lucid dreaming, both living life fully, but stepping back enough that we can enjoy it and not be caught up in it. Looking at life from a distance, from above the battleground. So over the next few days or weeks, I encourage you to just play with these ideas. Maybe if you have some free time, watch the movie Inception with Leonardo DiCaprio. If you remember that, there's like multiple layers of dreams, and they'd even get so confused they couldn't tell if they'd woken up or not, and you had to spin a little top to make sure that if it fell over or not. Or maybe the Matrix movies. Because all of those, they just help us step back a bit and look at our greater reality. And maybe every time we see something, just turn our head a little bit sideways, like, really? Is that really true? And just ask, what's real? What's illusion? Just being in the question invites Spirit in to guide and direct us. So I'd like to close with a beautiful quote from A Course in Miracles. And it inspires me. This is the way that I want to live in this world. It says, there is a way of living in the world that is not here, although it seems to be. You do not change appearance, though you smile more frequently. Your forehead is serene. Your eyes are quiet. Just one more time. There is a way of living in the world that is not here, although it seems to be. You do not change appearance, though you smile more frequently. Your forehead is serene. Your eyes are quiet. Thank you for exploring these ideas with me today.
Thank you for joining us today. If you like the message, we invite you to like it or share it. And we also want to let you know that we're on Instagram, Twitter, and we'll see you again next Sunday on Facebook at 11:25.
We're a New Thought church where lives are transformed, and we welcome you to check us out. Check out our website, unityhills.org. We'll see you next week.
Namaste.